Here we go, gently.
Let me know if you can't hear me, okay?
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I want to thank you first and foremost for your patience this morning. For getting started just a few minutes behind schedule, but all is fine. It's Friday morning. Hope you're enjoying your Friday. Welcome to this Student Affairs Non-Apparent Disabilities webcast. We are coming to you live from the Central Station U studio here on the 4th floor of the Chancellor's office. And would love to know a little bit about you. Who's on this webcast with us? Poll number 1, what area within Student Affairs are you in? I think I kind of stopped short on the end of that question. Poll number 2, what percentage of your students have a disability? And poll number 3, how are you viewing this webcast? Go ahead and extend that poll so you can see that a little easier. Well, we have our live captioner on with us today. Sharon is coming to us from Northern California. She's logged in, and she will be captioning word for word the presentation for you as we move through the session. And our presenter, I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. She's graciously offered her presentation available as a downloadable PDF at the very end of today's session. We also have an accessible version of today's presentation that will be available. So looking for your participation, your interactivity, your comments, questions throughout today's session. Primarily questions will be answered at the very end, but please do continue to type them in, and our presenter may stop at different points to answer your questions. So let's look at the polls here. I'm going to go ahead and broadcast these results. Okay, let's see what we have here. You should see the answers now. So it looks like we have, people are saying other, mostly saying other to some of these questions. Okay, great. Making sure these polls are open for you. We have folks in our advising. We have career services, student activities, and psychological services. Greek life. Like no one from Greek life now. All right, well, thank you for that. And heading over to poll number 2, what percentage of your students have a disability? Most people are saying they're not sure. Not sure. And then 0 to 5% is the follow-up to that. How are you viewing this webcast? Let's broadcast those results. Most people are alone at their computer, 26 people. We do have some groups on the line and even a group of 10 or more. So we have a few groups of over 10 people. We would love it if you could go to the Q&A poll or pod to the left of your screen and let us know what campuses you're coming in from. That's fantastic to have those large groups. We have a group of 9, a group of 8, 7, 6. Very good. So thanks for taking the time to join us this morning. With that, I'm going to switch over to our presenter introduction. Very excited to have Gently Ang on the line with us today to present. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and learning disability and mental health specialist for the Disability Resource Center at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. Since 2007, she has provided professional development seminars for Cal Poly Pomona faculty and staff to raise awareness and sensitivity to students with non-apparent disabilities from conditions such as learning disorders, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, psychiatric disorders, and autism. Additionally, she holds regular student psychoeducational workshops to teach and empower students to effectively manage their disabilities. Dr. Ang maintains a private practice in Pasadena where she conducts psychological evaluations for learning disabilities and executive skills coaching for adolescents and adults, as well as consultation with parents and mental health professionals on the transition needs of students with disabilities from secondary to post-secondary education. So with that, please put your hands together by clicking on the blue button just below and welcome our presenter, Dr. Gently Ang, this morning.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is very strange for me. This is the first time I'm doing a presentation while I'm staring at my own computer screen and not seeing any faces in front of me. It's a little bit strange. But, you know, I love connecting with who I'm talking to, and that's kind of difficult with this kind of format. So bear with me if as I try and get used to this. But I just want to say hi and thank you to everybody who's registered and participating in this presentation and this discussion. Let's jump in because I know that time is of the essence. Let me see if I can, okay, here we go. Today's agenda is somewhat ambitious given that I have, an hour, maybe less, to present all this information. But I feel that it's important to set a framework for our discussion, to first talk about the larger context that we're working in, particularly in a public institution of higher learning, before we dive into the particulars of the various disability types. I will end the presentation by bringing us back to the idea of creating a safe and inclusive campus for students with various levels of abilities. Let's talk about this first, our legal framework. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and amended 1977, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the amendments subsequent to that, they require educational institutions to provide reasonable accommodations to those who are otherwise qualified for the tasks required of them in the educational setting. So the university has a legal mandate to provide students with disabilities accommodations and support services. And we, even as the CSU, we've outlined this in the CSU policy for the provision of accommodations and support services to students with disabilities. I believe that document is available through even the CSU website. Accommodations and support services must be appropriate. This is, according to this legal framework, the mandate is to afford a student with a disability an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of campus services, programs, and activities. So when we're talking about appropriateness, we're talking about, is it giving them equal access and inclusion? Also, these modifications in policies, practices, or procedures, when necessary, to avoid discrimination on the basis of a disability, must be reasonable. And by reasonable, we mean they would not result in a fundamental alteration in the nature of the service, program, or activity. So academic programs and courses are designed with specific learning objectives to prepare students to meet, set standards. When students request course accommodations or modifications, these are considered reasonable only to the extent that it doesn't change those essential program or course objectives. As you can imagine, determining if a requested accommodation or modification is reasonable requires sometimes an in-depth but always an interactive process with faculty, the student with a disability, and the Office for Students with Disabilities. I often say to students, it's a three-way relationship. And all those three legs of the table have to constantly be interacting. It must also be pointed out, just as students without disabilities just as students with disabilities are held to the same academic standards as students without disabilities, students with disabilities are held to the same student code of conduct as all other students. And this is what we mean by, preserving those fundamental, the fundamental nature of our services and our programs. So you'll see it can be quite challenging when a student's disability directly affects their ability to behave in socially acceptable ways. But in spite of this, the student code of conduct is still the standard students with disabilities must be supported to adhere to. The other legal issue here is confidentiality. According to the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA as we know it, records that identify students with disabilities are confidential and considered educational records. It prohibits unauthorized disclosure to persons without a legitimate educational interest. And it does not provide access to treatment records of the student without a legitimate educational interest. So what does that mean? A question that's often asked that I hear a lot, how do I know how to spot a student with a non-apparent disability, or how do I know more about the specific nature of their disability so I can better help them? As you can see, FERPA limits your access to that information. Oftentimes, we don't know if they do have a disability or not. If a student appears to be struggling in a class but has not requested accommodations, it's advisable for professors or even student affairs professionals. It's not advised to ask if a disability is involved. It's putting them on the spot. It's forcing someone who might want to stay non-disclosed, if you will, about their disability status to out themselves. So maybe more acceptable ways to offer assistance might include suggesting resources on campus, such as tutoring or learning support type of resources. Certainly, other student services that are available through our division, and then including the Office for Students with Disabilities as one of those resources. Information about the student may only be released with the student's informed written consent and for the purpose of providing appropriate academic accommodations or modifications to the curriculum. So that's our legal framework. But in addition to this legal mandate and the confidentiality rights of students with disabilities, I believe a multicultural and social justice framework allows us to go beyond the letter of the law and address the spirit of the law. A multicultural and social justice framework extends our understanding of diversity and inclusion to those with different abilities and acknowledges the individuality, equality, and dignity of a person with disabilities. So it embraces the idea of diversity, extends the idea of minority groups to individuals with disabilities. Most conversations about diversity may address race, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, religion, class, age, and increasingly even immigration status. But disability is rarely included in these conversations. It's often thought of more as a health issue rather than as a social issue. Multicultural competence refers to one's awareness of personal values and biases, understanding the worldview of the culturally different, and using culturally sensitive interventions. The idea of multicultural competence refers to, well, let me say this. If we, as student affairs professionals, are to be multiculturally competent, we have to ask ourselves questions like, what are our own negative images about disability? What messages have we heard and perhaps assumed to be true about what it means to have a disability? So it refers to evaluating our level of knowledge, our possible biases, exploring the ways we think about disability, and doing that will only enhance our levels of professional competency. Now, the social justice perspective acknowledges that students with disabilities face barriers to their learning experience, including the experience of stigma and marginalization. The academic environment must ensure that it does not perpetuate this and students with disabilities are valued. In the educational context, a medical model of disability suggests that college-level education is not realistic for individuals with disabilities as a whole. Not looking at them in terms of their individual profile of abilities and limitations, but as a whole, kind of saying, oh, maybe college isn't the place for students with disabilities, implying that they're incapable of meeting the academic standards. In contrast, the social justice model says the academic environment has or is responsible for providing the necessary resources and support to accommodate persons with disabilities who want to be here and who are otherwise qualified. Okay, let's Let's talk about some of the negative social stigmas attached to persons with disabilities. Someone has said, let's not kid ourselves. These are present among stakeholders around campus. We hear sentiments that reflect the idea that students with disabilities are intellectually inferior. Students with disabilities are admitted because of special accommodations or special admissions. Students with non-apparent disabilities don't have real disabilities because they're not physical. It's been argued that by virtue of living in a society that holds negative stereotypes and biases against persons with disabilities, those stereotypes and biases are present among us in our campuses, in spite of whatever conscious attempts we might have to be multiculturally inclusive as an academic environment. Many students with non-apparent disabilities don't disclose their disability status. They try to hide or work against their limitations their whole life. To disclose for them is to become subject to these negative social stigmas, these stereotypes and biases that they're only too aware exist. So I'd like to address this need to foster a safe and inclusive academic environment in order to encourage disclosure so that they can access these available supports. So let me, since we are an institution of higher learning and we subject a lot of our students to evaluations and quizzes, let's try and get in wear some of their shoes. Okay, so let's talk about this question here. Which of the following reflects multiculturally sensitive language? A, I try to be sensitive to the handicapped. B, dyslexic students can be just as intelligent as students without dyslexia. C, autistic students are gifted in special abilities. And D, she has a mental illness. Okay.
Votes are starting to come in here gently.
Let me maybe give them a few more seconds.
Sure. Let's do that. Looks like we have about almost 20 votes in so far. And with about 63 participants on the line, we still have a few to go. What if I go ahead and broadcast these results as people are putting in their answers and we can show everyone what's coming in?
Okay.
It looks like the leading answer here is B.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, well, let's go through each one. And I'm sure there's going to be questions about why wasn't it A or B or C or D. And, I'm happy to get into maybe more in-depth discussions offline. I'm always available for that, either immediately afterwards or anytime that's convenient for both of us. But what I'll do, just to be expedient and efficient here with our time, is I'll go through each of the choices and give you an explanation as to why this is not the right answer or why this is the right answer. Okay, so letter A is not the right answer. It's not language that reflects multicultural competence and sensitivity because the term handicapped is now considered a derogatory term. Some people have said, it's derived from this World War II reference to veterans begging with cap in hand. We have to consider that our use of language shapes our experience and our worldview, and a disability is an impairment that limits a person's ability to perform a major life function such as walking, talking, seeing, hearing, reasoning, learning, whereas a handicap is really an imposed barrier that restricts a person. Letter B, which is the popular answer here, this language defines the person, or this answer reflects language that defines the person by their disability, rather than seeing their disability as only part of a whole identity. And rather than being described as a dyslexic student or a learning disabled student, And this might sound, too PC for a lot of you folks. I understand that, but describing a student with dyslexia or a student with a learning disability sees the person first. We refer to this as, person first language. And, some would argue, like I said, it's not just being a little too PC, but I think that if we seriously consider that our use of language does shape our experience in our worldview, then we might want to adjust that and talk about people first and then their disabilities or limitations secondarily. The answer letter C, or the option of letter C, similarly is not the right answer because the term autistic students defines that person by their disability instead of seeing the disability as only part of their experience and identity. Also, it's a myth that persons with autism are savants, or by savants we mean extraordinarily gifted individuals in areas such as math, music, or art. The stereotype is perpetuated by movies, that we've seen over the years. If you're young enough to remember Rain Man, even the personal story of Temple Grandin. Sometimes we think of these, these people that represent the whole group of individuals with disabilities, when really that's just one person. Some 10% of people identified as having autism are known to have some area of competence that's in contrast to their overall ability. We call these splinter skills. It's these one or two areas of extraordinary ability, but by far the majority of autistic people have ordinary or even less than ordinary skill sets. Finally, the option she has a mental illness is the correct answer here. To say someone has a mental illness is just being descriptive. It's not being pejorative. It's not being negative. So how do I close this, Jennifer? There.
Oh, let me go ahead and close that for you. Move that out of the way.
So, thank you. All right. So let's move on. So what I'm showing here is a breakdown of from this last quarter, winter 2013, the enrollment data of students registered with the Disability Resource Center at Cal Poly Pomona. And what I want to point out here is that by non-apparent disabilities, obviously we're talking about those where you normally cannot identify them just by looking at the person. We often hear about the barriers to access for students with physical disabilities and motor impairments. Less frequently discussed are other barriers to equal access for students with disabilities that are not as readily apparent, such as learning disabilities, ADHD, cognitive impairment due to acquired brain injuries, or psychiatric conditions. And then we've got those medical conditions that are not apparent. We have a lot of those. Chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe fibromyalgia, seizure disorders, asthma, diabetes. Yet these are the most common type of disabilities among college students. So you could see at Cal Poly Pomona, students with hearing, visual, and mobility impairments, those registered with our office, make up 14% of the total students served, at least as of the conclusion of winter 2013, end of March. The majority of DRC students, if you do the math, 86%, are those with so-called non-apparent or non-traditional disabilities. This part of the pie that says other, a lot of these are medical conditions. Yeah, I think it's important to note that students with various disabling conditions really may not appear to have a disability, and the severity of their functional limitations don't depend on your ability to see the disability. So we can't judge them. Now, this is interesting. What I did here is I took data that was available through the Chancellor's Office, and this is our CSU system total. This is all of us. Students with learning disorders, ADHD, mental health disabilities, acquired brain injuries, and autism represent 57% of students with disabilities across all our campuses. And you can see that the general breakdown or the general proportions are very similar. We have of course, this is all averaged out, but you can see that a great proportion of our students that are represented across our campuses have cognitive and learning disabilities. This big part here that says other. Now, I can't speak to that exactly because I'm not sure what everybody was thinking when they reported other. And like I said, for Cal Poly Pomona, that represents for us a lot of our students with medical conditions. So I thought this was interesting to show you all that we serve similar proportions of disability types. I know that a lot of you indicated you weren't sure how many students with disabilities are registered with DRC on your campus. For Cal Poly Pomona, we have about approximately 550 students, I believe, this quarter or this year. So you can do the math there. So now that we have this overarching framework, this frame around our discussion, I feel that, okay, now we can have a more productive discussion about these various types of learning disabilities. So I'm going to go sequentially in this order and talk about what this looks like for the average college student and talk about what we can do as student service professionals in student affairs. I did not prepare this discussion to address faculty members, so I'm not going to be talking about ways that we can, accommodate students in the classroom necessarily, but actually outside of the classroom. So let's talk about learning disabilities first. A learning disability is really an umbrella term. I'm sorry, wait, did I just, oh, I'm sorry, let's do a pop quiz. All right, that's what we're doing first, yes.
A little surprised.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so let me read this question out loud to everybody. A student identifies herself as being registered with the campus office for students with disabilities. She shares with you that she has a hard time writing by hand and requests your assistance with filling out a paper-based form required by your office. What is the best response in this situation? And here are our choices. A, tell the student to write slowly and take his time. B, refer the student to your campus office for students with disabilities. C, fill out the form for him while he dictates the information. D, provide him an electronic copy of the form if available.
The answers, again, are slowly coming in, but we are getting a lot of responses. I'll go ahead and broadcast these results here gently. Definitely D is leading the charge. Provide him an electronic copy of the form if available.
Correct. So letter D is the best response in this situation. So I'm glad to see that the majority of you guys out there, were able to notice that, yes, if an electronic copy of the form is available, that is really the best response given this scenario. However, how often do we have electronic copies of the form available and or have a computer station that's reserved for students to access, these electronic forms that we routinely ask them to fill out. So if D wasn't an option, if an electronic copy of the form or access to it was not available, then those who answered C would be correct, to fill out the form for the student while he dictates the information. Um, and that might seem kind of odd for some people, but in this particular scenario, and I'm going to close this, um, for a lot of us, uh, for a lot of offices on campus, my experience has been is that when a student identifies themselves as a student with a disability, then they get referred back to the DRC, or we get a call, there's a student with a disability here, can you help them out? And often I have to say, well, they're in your office, right? So they need something from you. What's the best way that I can help you to support you so that you can serve the student with whatever the presenting need is? In this particular scenario, it's a form. This is an actual scenario that I've had to interact with in my campus. And really, the best response here is letter D or letter C. Okay. So let's talk about learning disabilities. Like I said, it's an umbrella term used to refer to a wide variety of learning disorders that affect the way persons with average or above average intelligence receive, process, remember, and communicate information. So I want to point out, although they have average or above average intelligence, there's frequently a discrepancy between these intellectual abilities and their actual academic achievement. It's thought to be due to central nervous system dysfunctions, that the information sent back and forth between the five senses in the brain becomes scrambled and mixed up. So between receiving the information and then processing it and giving a response, the processes involved in that, there's some stalling that happens, there's some mix-up that happens, and so it's going to then interfere with the acquiring and integrating and demonstrating their ability to read, write, spell, perform math calculations. Sometimes it even affects speech, or what we call expressive language. 15 to 20% of Americans have some type of learning disability, according to the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And LD is the highest incidence disability category in public schools. And of course, it follows in post-secondary education, because these students in K-12 or in high schools are graduating and coming to us. So it's not surprising that that's the biggest part of the biggest slice of the pie that we're seeing and that we're serving. It's noteworthy that to point out up to 80% of students with learning disabilities have reading problems. And for, that's, college is a lot of reading and writing. It's very, very language-based. I don't want to go through all the different types of learning disabilities. There are lots and lots of types. But these are just some of the common ones that you may have even heard about: dyslexia or dyscalculia, dysgraphia. There's, it's really, like I said, it's when those information processing abilities are somehow impaired, or have some type of dysfunction, and so it results in these manifestations of problems with reading and problems with quantitative reasoning and performing numerical operations, or being able to control one's fine motor movements and integrate it with visual one's visual abilities, so that what you see and how that translates into what you write or draw with your hands can be very difficult. I'm going to go through that. I mean, I trust you can read these slides on your own. I don't want to belabor the point that there's different, obviously many types of learning disabilities that affects our ability to process information quickly, to process accurately visual and or auditory information, so that even the things that students might be not necessarily, not hearing per se, but how they're processing what they've heard you say. If you have a learning disability, that might be difficult. They might confuse similar sounding words that affects the whole meaning of the statement, or so they might find it difficult to follow verbal instructions and directions, especially those that involve a lot of sequential and complex steps. And, you know, obviously with visual processing, misreading a lot of the words or misspelling the words, and even when you're presenting information, especially visual information to students with learning disabilities, you know, it's advisable to keep it sweet and short because of that. Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges. Young adults with learning disabilities experience more social and emotional problems than do their peers without LDs. We know this from the research. We see a lot of social isolation and low self-esteem among young people with learning disabilities, especially for us counselors who, and I know that we have some counselors joining us today, we see this clinically. We see this, you know, in the course of counseling such students. But some of you might have direct experience, you know, interacting with these students, and you'll see this pattern. If you get to know them enough, they will start sharing with you that there's a lot of isolation. Many individuals with learning disabilities have been found. Well, I already said that. Okay, sorry. Young adults with LD have fewer social contacts. They have a higher incidence of emotional adjustment difficulties. They have higher levels of anxiety and fear. They're more likely to be criticized and ignored in academic interactions by their teachers. They tend to have profiles suggesting feelings of fear, obsessive thoughts, lack of self-confidence, extreme self-criticism and self-doubt. And for many, they've had these long-standing learning disabilities for most of their lives, since grade school often. And it results in this kind of chronic attitude or tendency to be apathetic, to be resigned, and to be withdrawn. So, I mean, is it then any wonder that their self-esteem is affected and their interpersonal functioning is affected? There's evidence that students with LDs seem to have learned to cope by becoming either highly dependent or very self-reliant. So there are studies that show students with LD are less academically autonomous and more highly dependent than their peers. But there's also research that shows that some of these students swing all the way to the other side. They've learned to cope by developing compensatory strategies. They become highly organized with strong study habits, almost obsessive, you know, perfectionistic to a point. The determination to excel and to work harder than others to prove their worth fuels this. And these students apply 3 times more effort and time to be able to perform comparably to their peers. This is done in secret, though, which only perpetuates their gnawing suspicion that there's something wrong with them, sadly. And LDs have a high co-occurrence rate with ADHD and depression. We know from the research that there's up to a 40%, I think that's about 40% co-occurrence rate between LDs and depression, and we know that there's up to 60% co-occurrence rate between LDs and ADHD. So you'll see this a lot, that when I showed you the breakdown of disabilities earlier, we are forced by the reporting process to just report one disability assigned to each student, when the reality is that most students have more than one disability and multiple disabilities many times. So what can you do? Remember that students with LD have both intellectual strengths and weaknesses. Avoid those rapid fire questions and allow them additional time to process and respond to what you're saying or asking. Provide both written and oral instructions simultaneously whenever possible, or maybe summarize what you've said to them, oral instructions you've provided, and follow it up with written instructions, maybe via email or so. Be patient and allow students to ask for information to be repeated or restated in a different way. Related to LDs, like I've mentioned, is ADHD, attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder. I say slash because most people equate ADHD with hyperactivity, when really a lot of our college students, if they were diagnosed with ADHD as children, many of them outgrow the hyperactivity, continue to struggle with the inattention aspect of the disorder. You're going to see that ADHD really looks like problems with these areas on the slide that I've mentioned. Getting started in organizing an approach to work that have to be done, we call that activation. Difficulties with sustaining attention and concentration without becoming easily distracted by environmental stimuli or their own internal thoughts. Lack of mental alertness and energy to sustain their efforts to complete the task. We call that clinically, or the research has been calling it, a sluggish cognitive tempo. Holding on mentally to information that's not needed immediately, but needed for future actions. We call that problems with working memory. They also have problems with controlling emotional reactions and have low frustration tolerance, chronic problems with impatience and such. And then finally, problems with inhibiting those automatic responses and impulses. We might think things, but we don't necessarily just give in to our thoughts. But for those with ADHD, they struggle with those breaks, I call them. These abilities or skills are unconscious and automatic in persons without ADHD. These are things that a lot of us just do automatically and unconsciously. But for those with ADHD, they don't do them automatically. They have their impairments are directly related to what we call these executive functions of the brain. So some of the challenges that these students have had to face their whole lives, they've been called lazy, they've been called slackers. Over time, they start to believe it. Students with ADHD may be very competent and talented, yet significantly impaired in their capacity to manage and deploy their abilities for many important tasks of daily life. They lack what we call self-management skills. And like I said earlier, it's related to these executive functions, which are found to be impaired. Due to the stigma and fear surrounding medication treatment, many are untreated or inadequately treated, and this is going to severely impair their learning, their education, their family life, their work life, even their social interactions. Most of those with ADD who receive adequate treatment, however, can function quite well. So it's very sad that due to the stigma and the fear, they avoid it or they're not medically compliant. Adults with ADHD are 6 times more likely than adults without ADHD to have one or more additional psychiatric disorders. I already mentioned the depression, but anxiety is a big one. Obsessive compulsive disorder, sleep disorders is a big one, and also substance abuse. So let's take another pop quiz. A high school graduate with ADHD moves away from home to go to college. Suddenly, he discovers there's no one in the dorm room willing to drag him out of bed in time for his 8 a.m. classes, to remind him to take his ADHD medications, to urge him to get a decent night's sleep before a major exam, or to remind him to get started on a term project at least a few days before it's due. You're aware of the student's difficulties as he's found you to be a sympathetic ear and has a few times confided in you. He comes to you at the end of the term and asks for your advice because he's been placed on academic probation. What's the best response in this situation? Here are the choices. Letter A suggests to the student to consult with his treating psychiatrist. B suggests to the student to consult with his psychotherapist. C, write a letter of support on his behalf, attesting to the student's earnest remorse and strong motivation to improve academically. D, refer the student to the campus office for students with disabilities.
All right, we're getting a lot of answers here, Gently. And I will go ahead and broadcast these results here so everybody can see. Hands down, D is the leading answer here.
Letter D. Yep, and that is our experience over at the DRC. How do I? Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
So the massive changes involved in starting college are just one of the many challenges of early adulthood that are especially difficult for those with ADHD. They also have difficulty managing money, seeking and keeping a job, moderating substance use, developing and sustaining satisfying relationships. And many of students with ADHD, understandably, don't cope well with the sudden withdrawal of parental support, failing grades, academic promotion or disqualification, oftentimes are the harsh call of reality that they need more adequate self-management. In spite of the impairments in self-management and self-regulation, that's the hallmark of this condition, students with ADHD are expected to manage these complex demands of college in the same manner as all other students. They're expected to meet course requirements and conduct expectations as well as all other students. Accountability is expected. Regular on-time attendance is not excused. And so letter C is probably not the best response. And letter D is not the wrong answer. And in this particular case, though, it may not be it just may not be the only good response. In many cases, it is the best response because a lot of us are not trained, equipped to counsel students with these particular type of challenges. So it's appropriate to refer these students to the DRC because you already kind of anticipate they're going to need, a lot more follow-up. They might have to be referred to the office the counseling office on your campus. But I put the options of letter A and B up there just to be able to address the point that these students probably need more extensive care, clinical care. And oftentimes, we at the DRC end up having to refer them off campus because even the counseling services that are available to all our students here on campus may not be sufficient, may not be adequate to provide the kind of follow-up care, in the more intensive care, given their medication needs, given their counseling or coaching needs. But yes, letter D, referring the students to the campus Office for Students with Disabilities is appropriate. What can you do? When working with a student who seems easily distracted and unable to focus, and like I said earlier, you may not know whether they have ADHD or not. Depends if they disclose to you. You certainly won't have access to medical records most of the time unless you're the DRC or you're their psychiatrist or you're providing counseling maybe. So, it's when you just see a student that seems really distracted, make sure you have their attention before you share critical information. Ensure that, personalize the information, show how it's directly applicable to their particular situation. Use their first name when you're talking with them. That makes a person look up and look at the person talking. And ask them, do I have your full attention right now? Are you distracted right now? How can I get your full attention? Because I don't want you to miss this important information. And then when you give the information, break it down. Break it down into steps, into small, manageable steps. And it also, the slide earlier applies here. You might want to consider having the information in written format as well. Let's see, let's talk about brain injuries. Okay, so we're talking about brain damage when we talk about ABI, acquired brain injury, brain damage that occurs after birth from a host of different situations. It could be alcohol, drug abuse, it could be disease, lack of oxygen, stroke, physical injury, but this is basically all the types of brain injury acquired after a person is born, not versus in utero. Long-term effects are difficult to predict, and they're different for each person, and it can range from mild to profound. But having said that, most of the college students we have who have ABI, they're usually milder long-term effects, or else they probably wouldn't make it in this kind of challenging setting. Many people with ABI experience increased fatigue, so you want to be sensitive to that. Some will experience some slowing down in how quickly they can process information, plan and solve problems. They'll experience changes to their behavior and personality. By that, usually it means they kind of become less inhibited and may manifest in some inappropriate behaviors, sometimes becoming hypersexual, joking inappropriately. They might also become apathetic, or oftentimes you'll see they are overly optimistic. They also have changes to their physical and sensory abilities and their thinking and their learning. TBI, or traumatic brain injury, is just one specific type of an acquired brain injury. 80% of combat head injuries sustained in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are considered by clinicians to be mild, as opposed to severe traumatic brain injury. So by mild TBIs, it's kind of like saying a concussion. Not to downplay what a concussion is, but when you're looking at the range of traumatic brain injuries, clinicians have to rank them or specify whether this is of the milder form or more severe. When they're moderate to severe TBIs, then the clinical community calls it TBI. Okay, but here on campus, 15% of those with 15% of those with mild TBI experience chronic symptoms, which significantly interfere with daily functioning. And these are typically the college students that we work with. Oftentimes, the documentation will say post-concussive syndrome, which is the same thing as saying a traumatic brain injury that's clinically more mild. And it comes with these symptoms of headaches and dizziness, insomnia, fatigue, impaired attention and concentration, slow info processing, reduced ability to remember new information, difficulty planning and sequencing, irritability and mood swings. I already talked about the personality change or apathy, and lowered tolerance for noise and light. Some of the challenges is that they have difficulty viewing themselves as disabled because they're actually new to this concept of having a disability. They may have to deal with ongoing grief, and they may be at various stages of accepting the loss of previously fully functional abilities. They may have to develop a new view of self and find a new basis of self-worth. Many of us, our view of self and our basis of self-worth is based on our abilities and our achievements. Many develop obesity, mental health conditions, and chemical dependency. What can you do? If the person is having trouble understanding you, repeat yourself, but use different words. Don't just say the same thing over and over, and try not to get frustrated. Break up your ideas into small and manageable parts that can be easily remembered. Be considerate without being patronizing. In other words, keep all conversations with an adult at an adult level. Don't talk to them like they're children. It's just treating them with dignity. Be directive and explicit when addressing behavioral expectations or providing structure. So it's hard sometimes to balance that. You're being considerate, you're keeping it at an adult level, you don't want to be patronizing, but you do have to be more directive when discussing expectations or, trying to provide some ways to structure their activities, because it can get very overwhelming to try and remember and process all this information after you've had a traumatic brain injury. But I think this last piece is also really important. You still want to hold that person to firm and clear interpersonal boundaries. Like I said earlier, a lot of people with TBI will have that kind of not so uninhibited personality. So they might sometimes cross your boundaries without really knowing that they're doing it. So it's up to you to point that out and kind of push back a little bit. Okay, let's do another pop quiz. Ben, a male student veteran, presents with a short attention span, forgetfulness, and difficulties with organization and planning. He regularly interacts with your office and knows everyone by name. In spite of being typically good-natured and friendly, he has a tendency to act on socially inappropriate impulses, such as using racist humor and making sexual comments indiscriminately. Lately, while encountering him informally outside of the office, such as during your lunch breaks and coffee runs, he has inserted himself into your conversations and asks many personal questions, such as your marital status and income. As you are leaving the office at the end of the day, Ben comes up from behind and walks alongside you towards the parking lot. He comments on how pretty you look and insists on walking you to your car. You're feeling very uncomfortable. What is the best response in this situation? All right, letter A, dial 911 because you feel unsafe. B, tell him you don't appreciate him stalking you and his behavior constitutes sexual harassment. C, assume that he has a TBI and he's harmless, therefore let him walk you to your car. D, say, I'm not comfortable with you walking to my walking me to my car, but I'd be happy to speak with you at my office during regular work hours.
I will go ahead and reopen this poll. Now we have the votes coming in.
And it looks like a lot of people are getting it. I hope nobody calls 911 just because they feel unsafe, but yet there's no immediate risk of harm to self or others. In this particular situation, I would imagine a lot of people might feel unsafe, but it might be premature to just immediately call 911. Certainly, if one tried to speak firmly to the student, such as in the letter D response, which is really the best response in this situation, and you've tried to affirm what your boundaries are, and you're giving instruction to the student, you know, see me during my regular work hours. I can speak with you then. You know, don't walk me to my car. And if they're still not responsive, then yeah, you might want to make sure that you ask for some type of help to secure your safety. I would certainly understand that. And letter C, assume that he has a TBI and he's harmless, therefore let him walk you to your car. I sure hope that you listen to those feelings you're having. You know, you feel unsafe, and so listen to that. Don't ignore it just because you're afraid, that you're going to offend a person with a disability. Your safety and your feelings are just as important. And if, you know, we want to be sensitive, but not at the exclusion of our safety and our own needs for comfort, for some safe personal distance. Let's talk about autistic spectrum disorder. Yes, we have a picture here of Temple Grandin. I want to say this. By next month, actually in a couple of weeks, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, or DSM, is coming out with version 5. And in version 5, the definition of the criteria, I should say, the specific criteria used to diagnose autism spectrum disorder is going to change. And what is reflected here in these slides are what the field believes is going to be reflected in DSM-5. So it used to be, or it still is right now, for DSM-4, autism was thought to be a disorder that a developmental disorder that is characterized primarily by, first of all, delays in language development. And you'll notice in this new criteria, you don't see language development per se mentioned. And that's because the spectrum of disorders as it relates to autism has really been confounded by the fact that though some present with these language development delays, some have quite developed language. So it really cannot be an exclusionary criteria. So instead, we say I'm going to just say ASD for short, is thought of to be a complex disorder of brain development characterized in varying degrees of severity by these three things: difficulties in social communication and social interaction, restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And it does represent, like I said, a wide range or spectrum of functioning abilities and limitations. I actually, Jen, I don't know if we have time. Do we have time for the video?
We have, the video is 10 minutes long.
Yeah,
and
I think
we have about 10 minutes left. Unless you wanted to play a portion of the video, maybe we play the first 5 minutes or so, or we can make it available online later.
make it available online, I think, and I think it'll make a lot more sense if we can hit some points here. But
I can actually, I was going to say gently, I can paste the link to the video for everyone
that'd be great.
To capture and view later. Okay,
It's
great.
a long video, and I think that it kind of puts together a lot of the points that we're going to be making here. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this pop quiz. Forgive me here. And I want to go straight to some of these challenges. Observable behaviors of students with ASD can make them seem odd and bring unwanted attention. Let's just put that out there. Difficulties with social communication can be misinterpreted as potential threats of violence, deliberate attempts to be disruptive, or reflecting lack of intelligence. Students with ASD face dating challenges, often go for long periods without being spoken to, and develop depression, anxiety, and or act out. Students with ASD struggle with new environments, unawareness of expectations, and with that, of course, comes anxiety. Students with ASD are less likely to access campus support services that are provided in group formats. They need a lot of that. They're more comfortable with one-on-one. Students with ASD often need assistance with personal and academic organization. So what can you do? Don't generalize and assume that all students with ASD are alike. Respect their chosen level of physical and social contact, and by that I mean some may not give you eye contact. Don't require or demand that. Some of them might prefer to do email communication and are not so comfortable meeting with you in person. So be sensitive to that. Allow a longer verbal or motor response time. Allow for important exchanges of information to be done in written form, like I said, email. Be clear, concise, concrete, logical in your communication. Don't make assumptions about what's understood. Ask them, what do you understand from what I just said? So I can make sure that you clearly get it, and I can correct any misunderstanding that might be there. Provide written step-by-step instructions, checklists, or intermittent check-ins for novel or complex tasks. And by this I mean, you tell them, okay, let's try you on a new schedule, so you can be ensured that you get to class on time. Don't just give them the instructions without following up on them and checking in and saying, okay, how did that work out for you? And maybe having to, have that check-in a couple different more times, to make sure they're getting it. Possible accommodations to support a student with sensory differences include allowing hats, sunglasses, tinted lenses, glasses to be worn. Some of them, I'll go back here, as you can see from the characteristics of ASD, this hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input a lot of times includes feeling overwhelmed due to high sensitivity to incoming sensory stimuli. So I'm just gonna, okay, let's continue with what else you can do. If possible, provide hands-on learning and demonstrations and visuals. Pair them, if possible, with peer mentors who might help with feedback, provide proofread opportunities, ongoing structure to keep on target with work assignments. Encourage the use of calendars in whatever different forms, electronic forms we have now, or paper forms, to develop routines and structure. Allow for stress-relieving or self-soothing behaviors, pacing, rocking, talking to self, flapping hands, that may make others uncomfortable, yes, but it allows them to soothe themselves sometimes, and they might need discomfort objects. Ask the student for suggestions on what would help or what he or she needs, but also be prepared to offer your own suggestions, because sometimes the options are just too much and they feel overwhelmed. They might need you to suggest something specific like, would you like to take a short walk with me outside and maybe talk a little about what's bothering you, instead of just, so what do you need? Or what can help you right now? They may not know. It's worth asking first, and if they don't respond or have difficulty responding, then provide some directives. I know we're whizzing by through all of this, and I apologize. There's a lot of info. but I do want to talk about psychological disabilities. And common to all of these conditions are features like mental disorganization, interpersonal sensitivity, difficulties with responding to change, heightened anxiety, and executive disturbances. I want to show you here on this slide how, well, actually, I'm sorry, that's the next slide. With PTSD specifically, I want to highlight what it is and what students with PTSD might manifest. Students with PTSD may display a tendency to be rigid and to view things in an all or nothing manner. They may display a tendency to focus on perceived threats. They may experience negative and intrusive thoughts and anxieties that can contribute to communication breakdowns. But you may not know that they have PTSD. You might just encounter a student that has these characteristics and you're wondering what the heck is going on, especially if sometimes you're working with students with veterans and you see maybe some of these tendencies that are displayed right here on the right of the screen. Then you might wonder to yourself, yeah, it could be PTSD. It would be a good educational guess, really. I mean, educated guess. You may not be far off. On this slide, I want to show you PCS stands for post-concussive syndrome. When you look at the symptoms of post-concussive syndrome versus PTSD, what I hope to show here is that they share a lot of the same common symptoms. And that's why really the diagnostic label sometimes really doesn't matter as much as what are the functional limitations that someone is experiencing if they identify as having a disability. And if it could be due to PTSD, it could be due to post-concussive syndrome, and they could be a veteran, they could be not a veteran. You know, sometimes this sensitivity to noise and light for those with TBI or post-concussive syndrome is present with students with autism, and it can also be manifest itself with someone who has PTSD. The challenges, there's a lot of shame because of the stigma and the stereotypes. And students with psych disabilities are the least likely to seek academic support or to self-identify. And their symptoms and the interruption of academic requirements as a result of these disorders, they're usually unpredictable. They might require hospitalization or inpatient treatment. Medication prescribed can have side effects and can result in fatigue and irregular behavior and attentiveness. So what can you do? If a student reveals a diagnosis, ask what supports may be needed, determine what is reasonable, and state why any unreasonable requests cannot be accommodated. So have that discussion about what's reasonable. Discuss inappropriate behavior as you would with any other student. Maintain a calm delivery and eye contact. Allow the student the opportunity to respond, but keep the communication professional. We're all, as university representatives, responsible to share information if it's believed that there's risk of injury or harm to self or to others. So whether or not you know someone has a diagnosis, if someone expresses a risk of injury or harm to oneself or to others, don't sit there trying to figure out what their disability is or if they're even registered with the DRC. Really, your efforts are better served trying to activate whatever processes are in place on your particular campus to activate the right departments or people to prevent violence, really, to coordinate those efforts. We're going to have to skip this one, right, Jennifer?
I think we can probably skip this one if that's okay,
Yeah,
just so we're not
time.
ending too late on people's time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I want to conclude with how we can create a safe and inclusive campus for students with non-apparent disabilities. Meaningfully include disability in your conversations and programs on diversity. As we talked about earlier, see the person first and the disability as only one part of a whole identity. Use person-first language and refrain from pejorative language that reduces complex disabilities to a punchline. You know, I won't go into the different punchlines. Recognize and understand your hidden biases and stereotypes about people with disabilities. Maintain those high expectations for all students, including those with disabilities. But at the same time, understand where they might be having trouble meeting those high expectations, but always start off with the same expectations you would have for any other student. Respect their right to privacy and confidentiality, and ensure that your different support systems on campus work together. I know that that was totally a wild ride. Jennifer, do we have time for questions?
We surely can take questions gently. What we can do is thank our participants and thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. This was really, really packed full of tremendous information. So let's give our presenter, Gently Ang, a nice round of applause. Thank you, Gently.
You're welcome. I wish there was more time, and I would welcome an invitation anytime by your office to, you know, to unpack some of this even more. You know, you can have we can have a webinar just on autism alone, and easily fill out, you know, an hour and a half because there's a lot of info.
Absolutely. Well, we hope to have you back. We can take questions at this time. We can let people know that this is, of course, the end of the presentation aspect. If you'd like to stay on for questions, please do, and feel free to type them into the Q&A pod on screen. Gently's presentation she graciously made available for us in the top left-hand corner of your screen. We have the accessible version, the second one there, with the date on it, the year. Also want to just mention that the ABC News video that Gently was talking about and we wanted to play today is the link in the center of your screen. I just posted it there. So please feel free. That's a 10-minute video and it's very impactful. So that's available. Mm-hmm. And I don't see any questions actually coming in at the moment.
Okay. Well, I'm also available offline, like I said. Do they have the information regarding my email, maybe?
They do have your information, but we can put it in again and remind people of what that is.
It's gentlya@csupomona.edu.
Okay, great. I just typed it into the ABC News video pod there, so they have that available.
Right. So I welcome any of your questions offline from individuals or groups. Feel free. And, you know, I can be available immediately afterwards or at any time that's convenient for you.
Okay, thank you, Gently. And we do have one comment. Somebody's asking if we'll be providing the presentation slides, and those are actually available in the top left corner of your screen under Downloadable Resource. So we have two versions of the presentation. Again, we have a PDF version and then the accessible version, which is the second one there. Okay, great. And I want to let people know that California State University Professional Development for Student Affairs Committee is made up of committee mentors bringing these opportunities to all of us. And we'd like to thank the team, Peg Blake from Humboldt State University, Candy Mink-Salas, California State University Fullerton, Jeffrey Klaus from CSU Long Beach, James Tarbox, Career Services, San Diego State University, James Lang from San Diego State University as well, Jose Luis Vargas from CSU Northridge, Catherine Schmidt-Whitaker, California Polytechnic State University, Pomona, from where Gently is joining us today, Eddie Dominguez from CSU Fresno. So to view these webinars online and other online resources, view the website for CSU Student Affairs. And I also want to thank Sabrina Sanders, who is here in studio with me. So thank you very much, Sabrina. She's really kind of led the charge in putting together these professional development webinars for Student Affairs. So thank you very much. And we do have a few more questions coming in here. Carol is asking, do you know the percentage of students with disabilities compared to the entire campus population? Good question.
On our campus, it's about 2.5%. We have about 22,000 students on our campus. And I want to say that it's probably going to be around that number for a lot of our campuses, but I can only speak, of course, specifically, to Cal Poly Pomona at this point. I don't know if the Chancellor's Office would have that information, I wonder.
Actually, Sabrina's going to come on and answer that. She has some information.
We do have a calstate.edu website specifically for services to students with disabilities, and you can find all the factual information for each of our individual campuses, including types of disabilities. And we'll make that available on the chat room as well, that specific website.
Great, thanks, Sabrina. And CSU Stanislaus is asking, will we also have the captioner typed info? And yes, we will. We are capturing all of the captions, and we will also post that next to the recording. So that is available. Great. Well, it looks like the question pod is quieted down a little bit. So we will go ahead and once again thank our presenter, Gently Ang. And we hope to have you back again, Gently. This was really fantastic.
You're very welcome. I apologize if that seemed really rushed. And I think that even if we had the extra 10 minutes at the beginning, Jennifer, there's just a lot of information here. And I know that it's probably really ambitious to try and cover a lot of these topics in one webinar. But that was my charge. So I hope that, that everyone got a little bit of something that they could take away with them. Something practical that they can use, and that gives them a little bit more than just general surface knowledge of these different types of disabilities, and perhaps gives them, a little bit more in-depth knowledge and skills.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap today's session. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again on another CSU Chancellor's Office webcast very soon. Thank you.